Hey everyone, welcome back. Part two. So I'm really excited to kind of get into part two because there's a lot of meat here, and then part three is like the conclusion, which is I'll go a little bit faster because y'all, when I wrote this blog, like I said, 14 pages and 28-minute read on Medium. That's a lot. that's a lot, but like it's also over like a 3.5 month span time frame, which is kind of crazy. But there was just a lot of shit that happened, and unfortunately, I just wanted to give truth to like what my experience was, at least most of it. That wasn't everything by any means, but I will try and keep this video slightly shorter. We'll see how we go. All right. So if you haven't seen or read part one, I would suggest you do that. It is kind of a prerequisite to understand, like, you know, why we here. Excuse me. I also say, like, yeah, I decided to just dress up today. You know, got my hair done yesterday. Wanted to put on a little sparkly stuff. I don't know, as I guess relive this trauma again. But again, my goal here is not to, you know, be petty or put anyone on blast per se. I am a big fan of holding people accountable, particularly our bosses, our leaders, or people in positions of power. I think that's our duty, and that's kind of what they signed up for, or they should have signed up for, with the knowledge of that they would be held accountable. Anyway, but I'm here to share this experience so other people can learn from it, can identify narcissistic situations that they're in, can hopefully, you know, build the community and the courage to make changes within their organizations, or if they're starting new organizations, do it differently because you can. All the things, and just also for folks to know, like, they're not alone. And if you find yourself in a situation, like, I'm a smart girl, I'm badass, but like I have legitimately had a series of narcissistic relationships, whether that's personal or professional. I'm glad to say I'm no longer in one of those, but nevertheless, you know, there's a bit of shame, or like, how did I get myself into this situation? I thought I was smart, and I'm here to kind of hopefully provide that community that, like, it's not you, you're not the issue. It is them. It is legitimately them, and the people that enable them. But anyway, I digress. I will get back into this flow of the things, into the stories. Okay, so as you know, I'm not working at this organization, Daylight, for maybe 2 or 3 months, right? And then I recognized really clearly, well, actually, let me take a step back. So as I get into things, I've been working at this startup at Daylight for like maybe a couple weeks now, and I can clearly identify, like, I'm the new golden child. But what is interesting is that I can see remnants of the previous golden child, which is something I have personally never experienced. And that was like a really interesting situation. So the previous golden child was, let's call her Kelly. She was like the head of marketing. I had met Kelly during the interview process and really vibed with them, was really excited to kind of work with them. And, you know, when I first got into Daylight, I did a diversity inclusion event for MX. And Rob gave me some talking points and talked about, like, he kept saying, like, you know, we got 100,000 people on a wait list in 100 days. And that was kind of like, I think, Kelly's big thing, that he may have tasked her with that goal, and she delivered. But after she used up her usefulness, I put that in quotes because, like, that's a shitty thing, but that's how I felt about the situation outside looking in. He started to shit on her, like, left, right, and center. And so in one particular experience of that was, I was in New York. He had invited us, I won't say invited us, he invited me to New York, and then it somehow turned into like these de facto leadership team meeting, because the founders were already in New York. A couple other leadership team, the head of engineering, we'll call them Tracy, the head of UXR, user research, we'll call them Elijah, myself. I think we're the only ones outside of the state of New York at that time, or even the city of New York rather. But so we all went to New York for this 1 week in March, a couple weeks before the retreat. And so we did a bunch of things, less important, but what was important is that Rob and I had stayed back at the VC office that they were using for this time. And we are interviewing like a head of design, which was a whole interesting experience. That candidate was amazing, and we've still kept in touch after that. Fast forward, he ended up declining our offer, which was smart on his part. Afterwards, he ended up reaching out to me, and we talked about it. Anyways, so after that, Rob and I ended up walking from the co-working space or the VC office to the restaurant that the New York team, so like all the people in New York, which was most of the company, was having dinner at. And mind you, like Kelly didn't come to on this trip, and I remember asking like why, and it was like a very vague answer, like she couldn't make it or things were going on, which again could have been 120% true. I just personally felt like she wasn't invited, and I don't know if she knew it was coming, but she potentially like took the opportunity just to not come, and probably be like, you know, shitting on the entire time. And so I 100% don't blame her not putting herself in those types of situations. Anyway, so on this walk from the VC office to the dinner, Rob is telling me all this shit that he should not be telling me. And the reason I say should not be telling me, because like I know there's like probably some HR things of like the things that you can and can't tell, or you shouldn't share about like other employees, like personal business or professional something. I also think there's just kind of like a morale, not a morale, but like a moral code of like, as someone in leadership, you just don't share information that you are privy to anyone and everyone, because it's not your business. It's not your business to share, right? But then I think as a CEO, there's a level of professionalism that you probably need to uphold. Don't get me wrong, I tend to act more casual to CEOs and founders and all that stuff now, because to me, they're just like, they're normal people. But like, you still recognize that you represent this company, and everything you do is more or less under a microscope. So anyway, so he's telling me all of these things about Kelly and how she's so bad at her job, and how there was an agreement with one person on her team to move over to product marketing, and how he was not going to let that happen because he was going to protect me from Kelly and this person that he did not like, or he felt was like underachieving. I don't know. It seemed like he had a personal beef with this person, but wouldn't like fire them for some reason. In hindsight, it's probably because like that person was trying to hold him accountable or to call out the bullshit. But in any case, he's telling me all these things, and like again, like how Kelly is bad at her job, how she doesn't know how to do these things, she doesn't know how to execute these things, and all she can do is like bring in vendors, like all this, painting this picture. But like the core of the talk, outside of shit talking the previous head of product, which again like I knew and had worked with, and this did not seem like him. The point of the talk, in my opinion, was one, to make me feel protected, like Rob had my back, which it did do, right? Like I think in the blog that like I was talking to my therapist about this, and was just kind of like dumbfounded that like to feel protected when I haven't felt protected a lot in my life was like a new feeling, and it blinded me. I was drinking a juice at that point, because I was just like, damn, like finally, I protect a lot of people, but like finally, like someone's taking a step out to protect me. And to be clear, I didn't mind the potential person moving over to product marketing, because like I didn't know them. My interactions with them were great. So I was like, in my opinion, we should have followed through on this agreement. And then if things didn't work out, then we would determine what those next steps were. But like, I felt it was wrong to like sell them this dream and then renege on it. Like to me, that's unethical. But also, I mean, that is the thread that we have uncovered thus far. In my opinion, the main points that he was trying to get to was like, be Team Rob, was Team Rob, and then like starting this beginning of, oh, woe is me. Because like the way he was talking about the head of the former head, because the way that he was talking about the former head of product was like that man was aggressive and abusive to him, and he didn't know where this was coming from, and poor Rob was just trying to build this bank to help queer folk, and like it was just like blah, 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 and it was coming like it was not based on anything. And I was just like, damn, really? Like he said that? And I wasn't like doing it to, hype Rob up, but I was just kind of like really confused. Like this doesn't paint the picture that I know this person to be. But again, I took it all with a grain of salt, because there's always two sides to the story and I was only hearing one of them. But nevertheless, that kind of set the stage for some other things that transpired after that point. Oh, and I had to call specifically. The reason why Rob was visiting New York and wasn't in New York was because he did not have a visa. So this entire time, outside of, I guess, like visits like May 2020 or investor or whatever things, he was living in Mexico in Puerta Vallarta. And that's where we ended up having the retreat, which I'll get to in a little bit. So the whole purpose of this visit, I actually don't know what the purpose of this visit was. He just said that he was going to be there and that I should come. But nevertheless, it becomes important because, him not having a visa, I will soon talk about why that's a thing. And then also just like some shady, in my opinion, shady things that because of him not having a visa, like at the time it didn't click, but then afterwards I was like, how does that work? Never quite got an answer for it, but we'll see. Okay, so dinner was had. It was good. Yeah, it was just like a big team dinner with like 15 folks or whatever. And then the folks that came out that were out of town, I think most of us stayed at the same hotel, so we went back to our hotel. My feet were on fire. Changed some clothes, put on hotel slippers, met them on the rooftop. And this was where like the second kind of like traumatic info drop happened, right? So I don't know what we were talking about beforehand, but it was me, it was Elijah, it was Tracy, and it was Rob sitting on that rooftop, and it was cold. Tracy ended up giving me their jacket, which is really nice. But we were talking about something. Tracy and Rob got us margaritas, and I think Elijah was having white wine at the time. But somewhere along the way, and maybe this was before, I think that the alcohol was after this trauma drop. Anyway, so we're talking about something, and then Rob goes into this traumatic story. Again, I'm not going to share it because it is very traumatic, it is very fucked up, and it is not my business to share. Again, but the reality is that like it's kind of one of those things where like what do you do when your CEO is sharing all of this information to you and you're kind of like that's fucked up. Like how, okay, like it's great that you're sharing, that you feel safe enough to share this, but like it wasn't part of the conversation. It was just like trauma. And then he like warped that into like the concerns of him not having a visa and what that means, that his life is so unstable, and that's why he goes to the same hotel every time in New York, because it provides like some sense of stability for him, and how like not having a visa is the worst thing in the world, and like Billy happened to get him an appointment so that he can do the thing, and then he'd have to go to Australia once he sends in his passport to get the visa, and how that was going to be horrendous and horrible, I guess, because maybe I had to see his I don't know, but like the thing was just like it kept getting bigger and bigger and bigger. And this man starts crying about it, like, oh, and then how he hasn't been able to pay himself for the last year. And he like has no money, and now had the fact that he has no money because he's been living off savings for the last year, and like all this stuff, he's just painting this like sad picture and this sad story. And I think like there is a place and a time for all of that stuff if it's relevant to what's being talked about. But like I honestly don't know the trigger. I honestly don't know the trigger for him to just share all this information unprompted, and what his outcome was outside to share. Maybe he was looking for a community. Like if I'm thinking from a positive perspective, maybe he was looking for a community, but I don't know why he would look to that for that in like his employees, like his direct reports. He had his co-founders that I think knew the entire story, that was there for him in his community. I'm sure there's other founders, other immigrant founders that could have his family. Like there's like lots of other people, so I don't know why he was doing that for us. And I didn't know this man long enough to build any type of like vulnerable, again, relationship with him. So, but nevertheless, like it was, oh, woe is me, everything is the worst for me, and he's crying. And Elijah wipes his tears. We all like give him a group hug, and we're just like, we just gotta make it to June. We got you. We got your back. Like, don't worry, we're gonna take care of everything. And this is like me getting into, you know, caretaker mode, because I mean, I can't help but want to help and also protect the people that are feeling sad or overwhelmed or stressed and all those things. So yeah, so that was just an interesting night. And then I think it quickly switched to be like, all right, well, enough of that, all those damn emotions, let's go drink. And so we drank a little bit until Rob was like pretty shit-faced. Like this 6'5" man or 4 man, whatever, was like stumbling around. And I remember him like yelling about somebody that was big in the queer community that I just didn't know. And Elijah and I were talking about it. I was like, okay, right, well, it's probably time for us to go to sleep. So, all right. So that then brings us to the retreat. So like this New York trip happened maybe mid-March. I went to the Seychelles, which is an island off the east coast of Africa, right? East coast of Africa. And right at the end of March into the beginning of April, because essentially I got back to Chicago from the Seychelles on Monday, which is when everyone was traveling to Puerta Vallarta. Literally came home, unpacked, repacked, left the next morning, Tuesday, to get to Puerta Vallarta. So I missed Monday's shenanigans and opening statements and all that stuff. But then, but I was there for most of the real shit show, which like really occurred on like Wednesday and Thursday, because Friday was a travel back day home. And so in the blog, I call out the fact that like when things are happening, at least for me, you don't always recognize the impact of it, like how shitty something is or how problematic something is, because you're just trying to survive it, right? And so I think of myself as a survivor now. I didn't used to think of myself that way until enough therapists and coaches have told me such, and I was like, all right, I can own that. But when you're in it, like, I think your defenses take over to like do what you need to do in order to survive the situation. And that's the rationale for why a lot of, you know, people, including myself, don't make a bigger stink about something in the moment, because it's almost like irrational, I don't say your rational mind turns off, but like there's a part of you that's just like, okay, this is some fuck shit. I just need to get through this because I need to make sure I'm safe at the end of the day. And whatever that looks like. And I feel like a lot of people of color, a lot of queer folks have that experience, and then like it just automatically turns on in your head. And again, in order for you to navigate. So I call that out because I don't want anyone who reads this or understands this or listens to this to be like, why didn't shit happen? Why don't you say more about it during the moment? Or for folks who have also dealt with this themselves to be like, to feel guilty that they should have done more, when I just don't think biologically you could have, just because you were focused on surviving that incident, whatever that incident could have been. And more importantly, I don't want you to discount something that was traumatic because you survived it. And I think I had the habit of doing that a lot. I didn't realize how toxic some of these experiences were. Even the retreat, like it wasn't until I think the article came out that I was like, holy shit, like this was really fucked up. Because at the time you're like, it was in the past, you did it, you did the thing, you got through it. Like you can tell like, okay, that wasn't fun, or this element was really bad, but like you can't, at least for me, I couldn't like see all the things, and I would discount it until someone else who was unbiased in the situation, who could see it for what it was like, no, Brittany, you were taken advantage of, you were X, Y, and Z, and it's not your fault, but like you need to recognize what happened and what, lack of a better phrase, those abusers did to you. So I want to share the same message with you. So I won't go into all the specifics of the retreat. There's a lot of things that happened, some things normal, some things abnormal. But I wanted to call out the infamous Take Pride sessions. So Stacy, I'll call her Stacy, our head of HR at the time, was really passionate about this experience. And from all the information I've gotten before and after, my understanding is that Stacey may have went to like a trauma camp or something like that beforehand. And my interpretation or my hope is that experience was really great for her. And she wanted to bring that type of healing experience to this retreat so that people could connect and, I don't know, take something traumatic and turn it into something positive. I think that was kind of the premise. I just think it was a flawed premise, personally, because someone voluntarily going to a trauma camp, knowing that they're going to talk about traumatic items of their lives or experiences with, like, I'm sure licensed and educated counselors to help them through it. That's, again, voluntary, that they know that in advance, is a lot different from someone throwing this out at a company retreat in front of a bunch of people that you just met that you'll have to work with for the foreseeable future, right? Like, those are not the same. And I'm taking it from a perspective that, like, she was not intentionally trying to do something bad. I just don't think she listened when people were trying to tell her this is not a good idea. Nevertheless, she starts off the sessions. The entire group is there. We're in Rob's living room, and she tells us, a personal traumatic story. I don't remember exactly what she shared, but even if I did, I wouldn't share it because, again, it's her story, not mine. But it set the tone for what kind of was expected from everyone to share in their small groups. And so from there, we go into small groups, and it's kind of like, all right, well, someone needs to start sharing. I share an incident that happened to me early in my career when I worked at Redbox. So this incident was traumatic in the sense that it's really, I want to say, shaped my life a lot more than I care to admit, is what I kind of say. And it was kind of like, I'm sure, an experience that many people have had. It just really hit me significantly, I'll say. And so the gist of it is that we were at a table about a project that I was working on, that I was leading as a product manager. And right across from me was like the design director. I can see his face clearly in my mind. I don't remember his name. But as I was talking about something, he started talking. And I was kind of like, okay, well, I'm not finished talking. So like I kind of raised my voice a little bit, and he raised his voice. And as I'm staring at this man, as we're both talking, and he's like looking in my eyes, but it's almost as if he does not see me. Like, I am not a person to him. And I don't think that he knew that he was doing this, but still, if the thought was that like I was going to stop talking because he was talking, even though I was talking first, like that was not okay with me. And I was very young at this point. I was in my early 20s. And just kind of dumbfounded. And I just remember like literally like looking around the room to be like, is anyone else seeing this shit? And the other women at the other end of the table, they were kind of just like, I'm sorry. Like, it was kind of like that, but no one said anything. So then I eventually just say out loud, okay, I guess I'm gonna stop talking because it doesn't matter. And then I just kind of sit back, and the man keeps talking, and he says his whatever, does his point or whatever. And I'm just kind of like, damn. I've never been experienced, like that was probably my first experience of like feeling not human by another human. And that is probably a pattern of like me not feeling heard or like not finding my voice type of situation. But anyway, so I shared that to hopefully give a different perspective of something that was traumatic, but not like sexually abusive or things of that nature. But like I said in my blog, I think the damage was already done based on what Stacey shared. And from that point on, the other folks in my group, they shared a lot of stories which I will not repeat. But like they were deep. Like it was, people have gone through a lot. There were a lot of tears that were had. And then the session ends. Well, before the session ends, one person in particular was not doing well. They were visibly like shaking and just like, I could tell the the stress and the anxiety that they had about what to share with this group of people. I was just like, this is just so fucked up to put us all in this situation. So I eventually tell them, you don't have to share. It's not worth it. And then we end the session and we kind of move on. It wasn't until way after that I found out that other people in other teams had like name tags. And this is what you read about in the New York Mag article, with like domestic abuse survivor, things like that. And I'm just like, seriously though? Like what? They thought that was a good idea? I don't know. It just was really shitty. It was really shitty to spring this on people. It was really shitty not to, in my opinion, not to prepare us for like what we were about to hear. No one had training. There was no like counselors on the lot to be like, this triggered me in this type of way. Now what do I do because my coworker told me that I remind them of their abuser? Like whatever the case is, like it was just, from the jump, it was just not thought out, not planned, just not good. And when I shared my concerns after the fact, that I was like, people potentially need some like counseling to deal with the fuck that just happened to them. Like, it was kind of just like, no, like, it was like not even disbelief. It was just like ambivalence. Like, you're wrong. I heard this was great. And I was like, damn, y'all, this is just really shitty. So I think this was, last thing that I'll share is, so like the final presentation that Rob got up and gave us. And like, I say that like, this is like his TED Talk. Like, he was prepared. He was prepared. Like, this was his moment. All eyes were on him. Like, you could tell he was excited to like have all the attention. And so he goes through like, this is the plan for Daylight. This is the plan for 5 years. This is the plan for 10 years. He talks about, all the things that we need to do is in the next 64 days or whatever the time frame was, in order to make all of these things, the goals for the 5 and 10 years to be a thing. But I remember thinking, one, when he was like, we're gonna have Daylight babies. I was like, huh, okay, that's an interesting thing. And then two, when he was like, essentially like, you need to think about whether you want to be on this journey or not. And if you don't, then that's fine. There's no hard feelings. We'll give you 2 weeks of severance. And at the time, I was like, oh, that's nice. 2 weeks of severance, but he's like, you have to tell your direct manager by so-and-so date and blah, blah, blah. But like, I could also kind of get the feeling of like signing away or like pledging allegiance to Rob and Daylight was just such a weird thing that like, and the only other comparison thought is like, another narcissistic boss I had worked with after I left their employment. One of the employees that was still there had, contacted me after the fact and was like, they were having issues with that boss as well. And apparently like the boss was like, you had to sign this contract of like allegiance to her. And it's not even like allegiance to the role, to the company, like to her as a person. And I was like, huh? Like for real? Like for real? Like for real? She wanted you to sign a contract of like a marriage contract? Like, I was just so confused. And so that's kind of what I thought of, like when Rob was like, pledge allegiance to me. Get my asthma to flare up and shit. I don't know. It gave very culty vibes. And I 100% think that like, if given an opportunity, Rob would absolutely, again, my opinion here, run a cult. I just think like, it just totally fits up his alley, 110%. Like the adoration, you do everything, all the things, like, whew. Anyway, I'm gonna skip over the whole like me taking on extra work. I am partly to blame for a lot of that, but I think the point that I wanted to make in the article was just that, recognizing that I got that like something that's intrinsic in me really filled a need for him, and he pounced on it, and I fell into it, and I 100% acknowledge that. But I think the article, my blog goes into that. You don't need me to tell you more about that. Anywho, the last couple of things about the retreat that, in my opinion, were problematic was that it felt very Trump-esque. And when I say that to say, like, I can't remember how many times, like, Trump, like, paid his companies to do things or, like, host things. Same thing. It felt like Rob was using daylight as his personal piggy bank and used this retreat as an excuse, like hosting it at his house, as an excuse to get like a paycheck out of them. Because remember, he was, not even a month ago, he was crying about how he didn't have any money and blah, 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 blah. But like his house was not a venue for this. He used his normal staff to cook like the same thing every single day that some people couldn't eat because like they're either allergic or they're just like, they just didn't eat that type of food. It was always fish. It was fish stuffed with something. I think I heard that one person had to eat asparagus for 3 days because there was nothing else for them to eat, which is, again, fucked up. The space wasn't attuned to like having 25 people in your house. I mean, it was just shady, okay? So, I found out like just the basic things that you would expect for someone to be able to provide for you, particularly like in another country, right? Like water. Folks apparently didn't have water when they needed water. Again, not food. And it feels like that's probably an HR thing or like a workplace thing, but maybe because we're in Mexico, like it's not a thing. I don't know. I'm not an HR expert, but it just feels like it shouldn't have been okay for that to have been allowed, right? There's no bottled, and then when I think about it, there was no bottled water. Like there could have been, recovering alcoholics and all they had was Mexican water, which was like margaritas or something like that. Like, you know what I mean? Like it just wasn't okay but I don't think the goal was to make this like, to care, I don't say to care about the people, but to me it was like a cover for his own needs. Let's say that. Okay, so then we all get back to our day-to-day. Do this extra work, extra credit work, get an A on it. People love it. We're set with goals. We know what we're doing, blah, 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 blah. Good stuff. And then everything changed. And I'll tell you, this is like the span of, I think this is like the span of maybe a month that like things just changed like really, really heavily. But I can almost pinpoint the day where like it was a hard switch for me. But I'll tell you what I think happened behind the scenes before I tell you what happened in front of the scenes, like what I experienced. So what I think happened behind the scenes is either the founders, their investors, somebody was like, y'all, or let me say, they were essentially being like, yo, this whole banking thing, this financial services thing is not gonna work because all these other banks are failing because they can't make money the way that you plan on making money. And, mind you, the head of partnerships and I had talked to all the founders about the fact that the deal that they signed was just trash. Like the deal that they signed with their banking service provider, couldn't make any money at it at all. And I was like, yo, this is really bad. Like really, really, really bad. And then no one really cared about it. They were just like, it's fine. They don't, investors don't care about that. You just need to have user growth. And I was like, okay. I mean, the money's profitability is I think like important for a business, but I'll stay in my lane. I'll do my job. You do yours, I guess. But I think behind the scenes, what became clear is that this was not going to work. And they had just raised, a 15 million Series A. I don't know if they actually collected all the money, to be honest with you. I mean, that could also be a reason why like these things behind the scenes happening. Like there are such things as like, multiple closes when you raise a round. And so maybe they didn't close the second part of it. Maybe investors backed out because they're seeing some things happen in the market. I don't know specifically, but this is kind of what I'm surmising based on all the other things that I know about being in this industry. So essentially, like the bank is not working. Y'all need to pivot. You just raised a bunch of money. Just pivot to something else. And then I think it was really clear that Rob wanted to do daylight babies. What he ended up calling daylight grow. He wanted to do fertility services. And like, I think this was always his plan, to be honest with you, because I remember in part one where I'm telling him about my fertility journey. He's like, great, when we get to this, you'll be my expert. So I think that was always his plan, that like he felt like this was a market that he could, charge people for, whatever the case may be. But Elijah and team, which they had a badass team, did user research, and it was like, no. One, a lot of the services I think that Rob wanted to do was done for free by like a lot of nonprofits. Two, the customer base that we were focusing on for the banking service, they didn't have all of that extra money to want to pay for something like this, right? They weren't at that stage in their lives, so it was like mismatched. Like, you're not thinking this through. But he did what he wanted to do, and then Daylight Grow also failed horrendously. Nevertheless, back on track. So I think all this happened behind the scenes, that the bank was failing, they needed to pivot. But as opposed to being honest and open with the org, to be like, this isn't working, we need to like all hands on deck think about what we can do next. He was like, let me fuck with people's heads, fire half the company, not tell them what's going on, and then after we fire half the company, then do this kind of thought exercise with who's ever left, like my favorites at that point. Because essentially what happened next, specifically to me, was, in my mind, completely unnecessary. So like, he starts off by telling me that I am not performing at like the level of a VP of products, right? And I was just like, oh, okay. I'm sorry that you feel that way. Like, what can I do to change? What can I do to be better? Because like, I'm an overachiever. I wanna do a good job. Like, it's really, really important to me. And it was also a little bit of a change from what I had heard these last months working there, when everything I was doing was great. We managed to get out of beta. We were doing all these, like, we were doing a lot of things, given that like I didn't have a real team, like all the stuffs, like, but beside the point, I thought we were making really good progress in the time frame. But whatever, I'm underperforming. And then he asked me to write this product strategy doc. And when he asked me to do that, I was like, I won't say lost my mind, but like, I was fine writing the doc. But I remember having a conversation with my coach about being like, either my coach or my therapist, to be like, he wants me to do all this work on the strategy doc. He wants me to hire like 12 people, and he wants me to like launch all these things and and like like he wanted me to do 17 things at once. And I was like, and so I ended up trying to have a conversation with him. He's like, I'm happy to invest a lot of time in the strategy doc, but then I can't do all these other things. And then he was like, no, you need to do it all. I was like, okay, trying to do my best. So I write the strategy doc. I'm staying up nights, staying up late at nights, doing things on weekends, meeting with him on weekends, because he's in Australia at this point, getting his visa. And then the feedback, as soon as I submit the first draft of it, it's like, okay, this is good. This is looking good. I like where things are going. And then his response is like, when I ask the ill-fated question of like what percentage do you feel like this is done? What are the things that you like to see in it? He's like, oh, actually, this is shit. And like, that was a hard moment. I have it in Slack, where I was like, oh, that was not what I expected to hear. I was expecting to hear, oh, this is like 80% done. This is what the 2 or 3 So now I'm like trying to read his mind as to like what he wants me to change. One day he's downplaying the framework that I used to create the product strategy document, even though it's like created and built from like a well-respected product leader, Ravi Mehta, and saying shit like, you can find anything from a rando on the internet. And and he said that with like straight face, like knowing what he was doing. And I was kind of just like dumbfounded, like, okay, I could remove it if that makes you happy. Like, I was just really trying to meet whatever expectations that he had, because he had set the stage as if I was underperforming, So anyway, like it was, if it wasn't one thing, it was another, right? And then I effectively got demoted because this new golden child, because my usefulness, right, had expired at that point, was the PM that we had hired. And at the time when we hired her, everyone was under the impression or acknowledged the fact that like she was not really a great PM, right? But she had specific skill set, and she was really junior. But we're like, we're gonna take the chance. He specifically wanted this person with the skill set. I happened to find her and convince her to move and blah blah blah. But in the time frame that from when she actually started at the retreat to like this time frame that this was happening, she had not delivered a damn thing. And things that should have been well within her purview to deliver, but she had not delivered a damn thing. And so by this point, I had already like shared my concerns with her, with Rob, with HR. And I remember Rob saying specifically, well, then, figure it out. And I was like, okay, but I want to be empathetic. I want to give her some time to settle in to the startup. She had some personal things going on with her that had her out of town or whatever. So I was trying to, give her some space and give her some grace. But it was clear that like once Rob got his visa and moved to New York, that like she was his BFF, right? So I effectively got demoted, and they split my dev team in two, and I managed one dev team for like 2 weeks, and she was supposed to manage the other one. And legit, when I say legit, like Rob literally wanted to pit us against each other. Like he had this whole concept of based on RuPaul's Drag Race, well, we were gonna like drag race each other, and how we were gonna like compare each other on like output or some shit like that. And I was like, this is all the way wrong. Like this is just all types of wrong. And I felt like it was just like a mind game for him to be like, ooh, we're gonna have them like fight it out, and then whoever loses, we can just like fire them all. Like it was just like, I feel like just nefarious, like for no reason, right? Because like none of this shit had to happen. You could have just legitimately be like, we're gonna lay people off because he told me that. Also, in a one-on-one before he like flipped the switch in his mind, he told me that like we're likely gonna have to lay people off. And I was like, okay, I understand that. If that's the case, just let me know, right? Because I didn't take it personal, because like I understand the business decisions. If you do not have the money, if this business is not working, like layoffs have to happen, cuts need to be made. Understand that. I'm not upset about that. That's business, but like the expectation is to take care of the people that you convinced that you sold this dream to, which he did not. And on top of that, he like, let me just ruin their lives a little bit. Let me sprinkle in a little trauma, give them something good to talk about with a therapist. He also told me during that time when he told me that that layoffs were likely coming, he's like, everyone who's left here has sued me. And that should have been a fucking red flag, to be honest with you. He was like, everyone views me as like a father figure and are trying to work through like personal issues with their father, like in this employment, and they all end up like suing me after the fact. And I remember saying, I won't sue you. Well, my bad. At the time, I had no intention of suing him. Even if he would have laid me off, like in a respectful way, I wouldn't have sued him. The reason I sued him with a group of other folks is because they did us all dirty, and I'll explain more in part 3. Because it was just, again, it was unnecessary, like, and I don't know why you would want to purposely traumatize people when you don't need to, particularly when it's a group that you identify with, right? When it's people that have been through some shit. And people are here who are doing this work, who are taking pay cuts, who are working crazy hours, who are like dealing with your crazy founder shit, for the betterment of this mission to help their community. Why would you? I just still to this day, I cannot understand why people do that. And this is the second mission-oriented company that did that too. Third, I don't know. It's just really, really fucked up. Okay, so this is essentially like at the end where I got demoted, and Elijah had went on leave, and I was like kind of filling in for the reports, and like, all the essentially classic narcissistic things. I could at least see him do it to other folks of like trying to get me on board and shit talking what Elijah's team had produced. And I'm happy to Slack, and it was like essentially like, do you think they did a good job, or like, do you agree that they did a shit job? And I was like, well, they did what you asked them to do. And then silence. So then alienation is the next thing, right? Like I said, I got demoted. My one-on-ones got canceled or moved, or then never happened. You didn't show up. It was always an excuse. And then, you know, not even just telling us that like, hey, there's a leadership onsite or offsite that's happening. It was actually just the founding team that was supposed to be, it was actually just the founding team that was like supposed to be taking some time off to figure out the next steps or whatever. Except that like we can see it clear on the calendar, and we can clearly see that like Tracy, the head of engineering, is being invited, but like me and Elijah, the head of user research, were not, because at that point Elijah had came back. Elijah was, you know, sharing that like this doesn't make sense from a customer perspective. We've done all this research that shows us A, and we're trying to force B, and that's just not a thing. And Rob was not happy about that. Like, I think that even at that point, they started going directly to like one of Elijah's reports as opposed to like, you know what I mean? Like, it's just like really shitty things. Yeah. And then like, I want to say maybe the last thing that like really maybe put the nail in the head on from Rob's perspective is like us being in a leadership team meeting, and him, I forget exactly what the comment was, but it then ended up rolling into like, who here uses the daylight card like on a regular basis? And I didn't. And so I didn't raise my hand. And he's like, you know, it's problematic if the head of product doesn't use the card on a regular basis. And I was like, okay. I mean, I use it to test the features, but like, again, they hadn't built a way to take money out of the bank. So I was not gonna put all my paycheck in that bank. And we all know now, I mean, probably me more than most people, that trying to get a consumer bank startup is just not an easy thing. To get someone to change their whole financial lives on a subpar product, because they're all subpar, right? Bank of America, Chase has 1,050,000 years on all these new apps, right? So unless like you're hitting a specific need, which Daylight was hitting as far as like having your chosen name on the debit card, for me, that wasn't a requirement. That wasn't a big enough need for me to move my entire life. And so therefore I did it. I put money in it so I could test features, but like I also wasn't gonna lie about not using it every day. Like, I'm not about to lie for y'all. I'm not afraid of y'all. But then that set off this whole thing of like, well, I'm just gonna have to like look at monitor everyone's usage moving forward. And I was like, that's not. Is that legal? I don't think it's legal. And honestly, it wasn't until after we all got laid off that like it also the light bulb went off of like, how does Rob have a Daylight card? Because he did not have a visa, so he was not a citizen, so he did not have a SSN. And I think at the time they were only taking U.S. citizens because some of banking regulations, you have to do this thing called KYC or know your customer. And I think there's like 5 fields that are required: your first name, last name, birth date, street address, and your social. And so social, he did not have. So I don't know how he got a card, and he had one. He had it in his name. I have screenshots of like things that prove all of that. And so I'm just, again, I don't know. It's not up for me to understand. It's for maybe the authorities. Anywho, so I had my first trolling comment, y'all. Hopefully I can figure out a way to like put it right here or something like that. And I call this out because it's like, I feel like I hit a milestone. Like, I triggered somebody so much just on the name of the video, because it was clear from their comment they hadn't actually watched the video at all. But go off, sis, whatever. And I responded to them on YouTube, and probably a more, I don't say more professional way, but like in a place of curiosity, because I was kind of like really curious what part of the video had them come to that conclusion, because my interpretation is that they didn't read it, they didn't watch the video at all, and they just read the title and was like, oh, I'm gonna come after this Black woman talking about suing the employer, not knowing that like what any of the details. And I was like, and sis, I haven't even finished the fucking story, so you don't even know. But anyway, what it did make me realize is that I didn't share what I had planned to do with the money, because as opposed to what this comment says, it was not about for me a quick way for me to get rich. The reason why I put myself out there was really because I had a privilege I did not need to take the severance. And I felt that all the people that were forced to take a severance deserved better. And so I was really fighting for them. And particularly there was 3 people that I knew were already being underpaid. Like they were agreed to the salary, I think during like the seed round, and like they were supposed to get like a salary adjustment once the Series A landed, and I don't think that ever came through, just because soon after the Series A, all the shit fell apart. And they were living in New York, so shit is expensive in New York. And so I just felt like, which I'll talk about a little bit of how like the whole layoff process happened, like they just deserved better. And so I was like, you know what? I'm in a position now where I can stand up on their behalf. And the goal was to, whatever settlement came out of this, give it to them in a way that would not fuck them during tax time. After lawyers' fees or whatever, like I feel like they deserved it. And that's why I did it. So it was not for me, it was not for personal gain. But yeah, the settlement was shit. And so I was like, unfortunately, thought what was better use was sharing the story with everyone else. And then I, plan on helping at least the one person who ended up, staying connected toward the end and in other ways, in the best way that I can, which I think will be more impactful than just like a check of, a couple thousand. But we'll see. I mean, my goal is to make them much more money than that. And then another question which has come to mind, and no one's, I don't think explicitly asked me, but it's something I have talked about before with my therapist and my coach, is like going public with all this stuff, being named in the suit as opposed to a Jane Doe or whatever. Aren't I afraid that employers won't hire me? 100%. Like that is the risk that we took. Not just doing the lawsuit, but also, pursuing this New York Magazine article. It's 100% a fear, but I kind of break it down into 2 things that help me manage that concern. One, I've learned a lot about the types of workplaces and people that I want to work for, and I'm much more discerning. If you go back to one of my other YouTube videos, I could probably link it. I list all of like the questions I start asking to hope to kind of pull out some of those narcissistic tendencies so I can identify them sooner and be like, no. And 2, where I've had some consulting clients, I have a full-time job at the time of this taping, which I've been at over a year, and they haven't done shitty things. So like if you're an employer, if you're a founder or CEO, and you're like so worried about people outing, just don't do shitty things. Like it's so super, super simple, right? Like you realize like there would be no lawsuit if you treated people fairly. Like, and I don't mean you have to like be overly, crazy and generous and spend millions and like just treat people fairly. And then you don't have to worry about someone like whistleblowing or like putting your shit on the internet, because there'll be no shit to share. It's super simple. And all the employers have complete control over how this works. So that's to say that my employers now don't have to worry about it because they haven't done shitty shit to me. And so there's nothing for me to say. And that doesn't mean like we don't have our issues from time to time, but like, as you can tell from this story, like it's like a different level of shitty, not just normal, like we have a disagreement, we're gonna, disagree and commit. Now, this is like, particularly when it comes to, in my opinion, all of the, stuff around the strategy and all that stuff, like that was intentional. Like that was, he had an intent to induce trauma or create like a toxic workplace or unsafe workplace for me. And to me, it was for his enjoyment and for fun. I don't see any other way there, and that's my opinion on it, because all of it was unnecessary. Like none of it needed to happen at all. And I think I even said something that he had said during that time was like, when I was talking about strategy, like he was like, if you don't know what a strategy is, I don't know what to tell you. Like, just like, the gaslighting. And like, it was clear by the end of this, this whole situation, because I went to New York for another thing and was walking down the street with some friends in fintech and was like, and literally had to ask them, like, what do you think a strategy is? And once they confirmed me with the strategy, I was like, I knew I was not wrong. I'm looking up definitions, I'm looking up examples, like, I know what a strategy is, and this man's gaslighting me to think I'm the dumbass one when he's like equating a strategy to KPIs, which are not the same thing. Anyway, as you can see, like, it can get me riled up because it just sucks. It sucks to have, an employer be nasty to you for no reason, and then take the victim route of like, actually, I'm just not going to give that more light. Anyway, okay, so I think this ended up being just as long as the last video. I'm sorry, y'all. I tried to keep this quicker. I cut out some things that you can read about in the blog. But here we are, end of part 2. So part 3 will actually go into like what happened the day of the layoffs, everything that happened afterwards, including retaliation, including the New York Mag article, finding a lawyer, all the things that happened into the end. So part 3 will be the last part, will be the conclusion. Again, open to any questions or thoughts that you may have. Feel free to DM me personally. I will anonymize anything. If you don't want it to show up in a piece, also just tell me that, and I'm happy not to. But again, I'm hoping that this gets to the people that needs to see it, right? That the people that can take something from this, that can learn something, that can feel a sense of, like, all the things. So I appreciate your likes. I appreciate your shares so that other people can get access to this. And yeah, until next time.